There is not a single guide for ESO that exists on the internet like this video that you're about to watch. We talk a lot in build guides about doing damage on the 21 mil dummy, but nobody ever takes the time to walk you through maximizing your damage in specific encounters. This video is going to give you a step-by-step guide to maximizing your damage in the newest piece of content in ESO, Lucent Citadel, showing you my thought process and the execution of top 1% parses currently available in logs. As a disclaimer, this video is intended to be a pretty advanced guide. It's meant for players who understand both the mechanics of the trial and have a pretty solid mastery of the Stamina Arcanist. If this isn't you, don't worry, my guide to Lucent Citadel and to the Stam Arc is linked in the description below so that you can get up to this level. And with that, this video is done through the lens of the Stamina Arcanist, since it should be the most common DPS spec run in this trial. If you are on another class though, don't worry. Almost everything that we're going to discuss conceptually, whether it be related to burst or maximizing your damage in pre-buff oriented fights like the Shattered Shard, should be applicable to every class. And finally, especially with some proposed changes in update 44, I didn't want to discuss my setups just to have them potentially change in a couple of weeks, so I'm going to keep an updated list of what I'm currently running in this trial in the Discord. So make sure that you join to get access to that, link in the description. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive right into it. We're going to start this guide off from the beginning with the first set of trash. Maximizing trash damage rotationally is very simple. It focuses on pre-buffing with as much as you can and getting into your spammable as quickly as possible once a trash pull begins. This bar setup maximizes skills that we pre-buff with. We should never cast Trap in an actual trash pull, and we should only cast Cruxweaver, Proxydet, and Cloak in between pulls. When we start a pull, we will make our first cast our ultimate wherever applicable, and then wall, flail as many times as we need to get to 3 Crux, and then we will spam only. If you can end a pull by flailing, you'll be able to start the next pull with 3 Crux, in which case it will not be worth flailing at all, even for the Abyssal Ink debuff. The ads just don't have enough health, which makes the fight too short to make it worthwhile to spend an extra GCD not being in Fate Carver. With that in mind, let's look at a walkthrough. As we enter the trial, we will cast Cloak, Cruxweaver, and Proxydet. Then we will throw our Destro in the center, where ads will be stacked with Acuity as a pre-buff, followed by Wall, 2 Flails, and a Beam. The Souls on buff usually ends up near the back of the pack due to the way the small ads die so quickly as they run in, so try to get that before the elite ads die. Once this pack is finished, we are immediately thrown into Trash Pack 2 and still in combat, so as we are moving, we should reapply Proxydet, and we should try to hit Flail in transition. Cloak and Cruxweaver should still be active, so no need to hit those abilities. This second pull loves to throw a series of about 3 meteors to wreak havoc on Arcanists, so we should wait to beam until we've blocked those. While we are block casting here, we can use Wall and even Flail if we're waiting for an extra second or two, but after that, try to go into Fate Carver as quickly as possible. You can get your Souls on buff here, but I find it more consistent to just get the buff fresh in the next pull. Moving into the third pack, we have a lot of time to pre-buff here, and resources may be hurting from all the running, so we should delay the pre-buff a bit in my opinion. As we enter the third room of the trial, we can start by pre-buffing again with Cloak, Cruxweaver, and Proxydet. Then we should be flailing as we are running over to the stack point. Start on the back side of the ads to find your Souls on proc when one of the first small ads die, then work your way to the front side of the pack to beam towards the dark ads running in. Flail and beam here only until everything is dead. The next ad pull is usually where I drop my second ultimate, mainly because that's where I tend to get it back, so we'll opt for Riptide and Acuity here, since we have our Souls on buff in a pack of 2 elite ads, where we are dropping our ultimate. This pull is simple. Cloak and Cruxweaver probably don't need reapplied, but cast them as a pre-buff if they do, and make sure that you dump your stamina if needed. I find that I don't usually have to try to do that at this point after all the running, but just keep that in mind. Cast Proxy and Flail as necessary while we rotate to the stack point, use Wall once we get there, and beam until the ads are dead. Make sure that you don't use your potion on PC for our Arcasis proc before the first boss. By this point, Souls on should be pretty close to running out, and we are entering a pack with 3 elite ads. For this reason, we will run Souls on in Azure, saving our ult for the main boss coming up and our potion for the next pack just before the boss. Pre-buff with Cloak, Cruxweaver, and Proxy as necessary, run into this pull, use Wall, flail only as many times as you need to get to 3 Crux, and beam. Look out for that Souls on buff early on here. Finally, here we break all of the rules. We want to prepare ourselves for the main boss fight, so we can pre-buff with any ability that we need to and throw Wall here, but we will not use beam. We will only use Flail to make sure that we can pop our potion on the Arcasis callout, and so that we can start the main boss fight with 3 Crux. And with that, moving into the first main boss, Count Ryelaz and Zillyesset. This is a relatively straightforward parse fight when dealing with Zillyesset, but one that requires some finesse on the Arcanist, especially when dealing with Count Ryelaz. You'll find in most groups that the damage on Ryelaz tends to fall a bit behind, and this is mainly due to the meteor mechanic. 2 waves of meteors spawn, and getting hit without blocking will stun. This mech happens quite a bit, which makes it pretty tough to do well on a class with a 5-second channeled spammable. The trick here is to know when and when not to purposefully get stunned by the first wave of meteors. You heard that right. Getting stunned and then breaking free will give you CC immunity, which means that the second wave will not stun you, and that you'll simply take the small amount of damage associated with the mech. I have rarely gotten killed doing this, and the only possible way that you can die is if you get double meteors dunked on your head, or if you get hit by the boss cleave, so just be hyper aware of positioning. The amount of damage that you gain by doing this, though, as you can see, is fairly significant, so if you can, you should. The golden rule on this side is to take the first meteor if beam is naturally next in your rotation, and then to simply block cast and reapply dots if you have 3 or more skills expiring. This is because the meteors take about 4 seconds to finish, so if you need to reapply 3 dots anyway, it'll line up naturally in your rotation. I find managing resources on this fight to be a little tough as well, usually with the issue being having too much stamina. So I like to use this plus bash weaving as a way to manage resources so that I could eat synergies on cooldown. The next mechanic that may interrupt your rotation on this fight are the luster beams, specifically the very first set. In groups pushing the trifecta or with good fight times, the first mini will likely die before it has a chance to give a second luster beam, which means you only get 1 beam to unimmune the first 2 sets of adds. This results in having maybe 2 seconds to go out and unimmune the second wave, which pretty much requires you to stop what you're doing entirely and sprint to the adds on the edge of the room. This is obviously a damage loss any way you chalk it up, and it's technically not necessary. With good healing and good damage mitigation, you can survive plenty long enough to swap sides before the adds enrage or start killing damage dealers. But it does make that portion of the fight significantly less safe. In my groups pushing for the trifecta, I make them stop their rotation and go handle the mechanic. However, when I get to be Parse Monkey, it's a support problem. Ultimately, do what your raid lead tells you to do here. Outside of this first specific instance, simply maintain your rotation and take a few steps out to unimmune adds as they get stacked. Finally, this fight has 2 main moments where you want to be prioritizing burst-oriented damage. If you've seen my guide for the Arcanist, you know that burst damage phases occur either right before a mech that disallows damage on a boss or as the fight is concluding. The room swap mech is super predictable and easy to orient your damage around. This occurs roughly every 60 seconds, and when the room lights up, you pretty much want to reapply priority dots and AoEs, which on this class is Wall and Scholarship, and then only use your spammable until you swap. As a pro tip, if you can only get 3 or less seconds of beam, use this as an opportunity to pre-buff going into the next room, using abilities like Cloak, Scholarship, and building Crux while waiting on the pad. This is especially useful if you are moving to the Ryelaz side, where meteors happen almost instantly. For this reason, when you swap to Ryelaz side, you'll almost certainly want to get hit by the first set of meteors in order to go into a beam once all of your dots and AoEs have been applied. The final burst phase occurs when the bosses are nearly dead. Usually in 12-man, you can expect about 1 mil group DPS on average, making our execute burst worth starting at about 10 mil. However, since we are split 6 and 6, that's obviously going to be quite a bit lower. For this reason, at around 5 mil is where I will make my last cast of any long and less important dots, such as Trap, Cloak, and Fulminating. Below 3 mil, I make sure that I reapply Wall and or Scholarship if they're going to expire. Below 2 mil, I only use Flail and Beam. The last niche element to this fight on the Arcanist especially revolves around using Coral Riptide effectively. Since we are split 6 and 6, synergy usage for this fight in particular can add a ton of individual DPS and can often be the difference maker in a top parse. Being able to use synergies though, on console especially, means that you'll have to take combustion on cooldown. This will shoot your resources up, and if you aren't keeping your stam low enough, will result in you being well over that 33% Riptide threshold. I want to briefly address the topic of munching synergies here on the first boss, and this is a concept that will apply to every situation in the trial. On console especially, we have gotten into the habit of avoiding synergies, mainly when the team is utilizing Alkosh, so that the Alkosh DD has enough synergies to keep the important pen debuff up consistently. In a group pushing the trifecta in this place, and maybe even the hard mode for that matter, it's time to grow up as a player, so to speak. Your Alkosh DD should be good enough by now that they can near flawlessly keep solid Alkosh uptimes with just Purify and Orb. These are the only two synergies in the game that are accessible to all 12 players at once, and can easily be rotated once every 10 seconds to keep perfect Kosh uptimes. If you don't have a Plar and therefore don't have Purify, then you could consider taking fewer synergies. But with Innerfire and Runebreak targeting 3 people each, this just shouldn't be an issue in most content. That goes tenfold for this trial, since there isn't really a reason to run Alkosh in an Arcanist based comp at least, and even if you are, in this fight specifically, you're only competing with 3 other DDs for synergies, so there should be zero issue. In this fight, I get 2.8k DPS out of Combustion, 2.1k DPS out of Radiate, 1.8k out of Pure Agony, 750 DPS from Runebreak, and some miss damage altogether from Grave Robber. That is over 6, maybe even 7k DPS from synergies alone. I essentially added an entire extra DPS ability to my bar. Adding 5k DPS to each of your damage dealers will result in a noticeable damage difference, so don't take this notion of not using synergies lightly. And on the Arcanist, keep your stam extra low so that you can cycle through and use Combustion, so that you can see the rest of the synergies around you without shooting above 33% stam. It's not worth taking Combustion if you go over 33% stam though, unless you know that you can either take a meteor on Ryelaz side because Break Free will drop your stam back down, or you are about to flail 2 times, in which case you can Bash Weave casts a flail to drop down 20% stam in just 2 seconds. Now that we understand the fundamentals of the fight, let's take a look at a walkthrough with some opportunities for practice. So as we run into this room, you'll notice that we're in our pre-buff setup, and I have my skills ordered in the priority in which I'll cast them, based on duration. The only exception to that is Endless Hail. This skill gets cast last because it's by far the strongest ability in this pre-buff toolkit when paired with the Maelstrom Bow. In general, our pre-buff will always be based around the dots and AoEs that have the longest cast time or the most relevance, casting abilities with the most relevance or shortest timers at the end of our pre-buff, just so that we get everything ticking on the boss for as long as possible. So we'll pre-buff with Scalding Rune, Caltrops, Shadow Silk, Orb, and notice how I back up to cast that before using Endless Hail. And then we will swap into our boss setup, where we'll cast Cloak, Trap, Scholarship, Xenas, and at this point the tank has finished their countdown and is about ready to pull, so we'll cast our Destro ult next to start our ult gen as quickly as possible, and because Destro can be used as a pre-buff since it takes 2 seconds to start doing damage. After that, the last ability we can cast before the boss gets in, which is Wall, followed by Fulminating Rune, the only ability that we actually have to be in combat here to use. At this point, we are about ready to flail and beam. Notice how I have 3 Crux, walking in with that from the previous pull, in addition to 10 seconds left of Souls on. We also have a Grave Robber synergy popping up here that I'm going to want to use, but you'll notice that the second we go to use it, a Combustion pops up in its place. This will shoot our stamina to 54%, which is something that we'll deal with in a second. But when the pre-buff looks this clean, in just the first 2 seconds of the fight, which you can see in this DPS tracker here, we are sitting at nearly 180k DPS before even going into our beam. So when we go into our beam, we'll get our first gloomy impact, the meteor mechanic. Here, when these AoEs come up, should we take the meteor and get stunned, or block the meteor and attempt to continue a rotation? If you said get stunned, you would be absolutely correct. There's no better scenario where we should get stunned by this meteor because A, beam is next in our rotation naturally, and B, our stamina is really high. So what we'll be able to do here is bash cancel a flail, and that plus the break free will drop our stamina all the way back down to 33%, putting us right back in the range of optimal Riptide damage dealing. So after the first 2 sets of beam, Wall has expired on the back bar, and it's time to reapply that, followed likely by Xenas, Trap, Fulminating, and Cloak. And then our ultimate is also ready here at 177, casting that as quickly as possible, with Scholarship 1 second left to cast. Even though we were at 3 Crux and ready to beam, the ability only had 1 second left, and remember on the Arcanist, if any of your dots or AoEs have 2 seconds or less, go ahead and reapply that early as opposed to going into a beam and applying it 3 to 4 seconds late. So here we get our second set of meteors now. Should we A, take the stun, or B, block the meteor? Keep in mind that Fulminating Rune is at 10 seconds. It is just bugged with the console timer UI. If you said take the stun, you would normally be correct, but take a couple extra seconds here and analyze the situation and see if you can figure out why this might be a mistake. The issue is that our positioning here is not very good. We are in front of the 180-degree line of sight of the boss, which means we risk the cleave mechanic hitting us, and that gloomy blackguard mini-boss is kinda angled towards us a little bit, so we could potentially get coned by that as well. And if we play it a few frames later, you'll notice, yes, in this blast of light, that we are in this cone from the gloomy blackguard and do in fact die as a result. This obviously is going to lose us quite a bit of damage and is the one situation that you need to pay attention to when intentionally taking the stun from the meteor. To be frank though, getting hit by the gloomy blackguard mechanic is a death either way, so I don't even really feel that this is a result of taking the stun. The big thing that I want to point out here is this is going to throw off when we normally drop our ultimate, so I'm going to talk a lot about that. But here let's talk about the recovery. We don't have enough magicka to cast all 4 of our back bar dots, so we'll need to take this potion, which is going to shoot our stamina all the way back up to 53%. For this reason, we're going to avoid taking the combustion for a little bit, and we're going to bash weave these abilities as we get them back on the boss. Now we have our third and final set of meteors. Should we A, take the stun, or B, block it? Keep in mind that we are in a much better position here. If you said take the stun, I believe that you are correct. We just got Fulminating Rune on the boss, which is all of our dots and AoEs, so Flail and Beam is naturally next in our rotation. Our stamina is also a little high here, and we would not hurt from a break free at all, so we will go ahead and do that, break free, be back down to 25% stam, and ready to go into a Beam. And here we reach the first burst portion of the fight. The first time where we want to make a decision about stopping the reapplication of our dots and AoEs to spam only. Now, I want you to notice with this group comp, we do currently have a Pillager active, which means that our ult is jetting like crazy. Normally, within the first few seconds of this, I'll have my ult to go ahead and cast right here, and then be able to ride the back half of the Pillager to gen some extra ult before we cross to the other side. Doing this will allow you to get a full extra ultimate in the fight and is definitely worthwhile, because if I just waited here, then I'd have 250 ult when we cross to the other side, and I would throw a Destro and then maybe one more Languid. But instead, I can Languid here, let that ult build, drop a Languid on the other side, get one more Pillager on the other side, and drop a final Languid to finish the fight. With a good comp and good force up times, this Pillager should line up here in your ult rotation. So if it's not lining up that way, feel free to hit me up in Discord and I can take a look and see what's going on. But anyway, note that that's how you're supposed to use your ultimate in this fight, in my opinion, but I'll talk about how I try to do it here since we're kind of in recovery mode. So with 10 seconds left until the Annihilation, Wall is expiring. We want to make sure that we get that reapplied on the back bar. We want to use this ultimate as soon as we have it, but I'm kind of in recovery mode and didn't expect to have my ulti there because I died, and I got it with just 1 second of the Pillager left with 7 seconds of the Annihilation. You'll notice that I go into a beam cast, and let's just take a look at our damage here. We're at 90k, and if we did this right, it obviously would have gone up, but we're at 90k, and I realize, oh crap, I have my ult back, so I cancel the beam, throw my ultimate, and then now, do you think that we should try to flail and beam, or should we start pre-buffing for the next room? With 5 seconds left to the Annihilation, we have 2 GCDs to cast Flail to get to 3 Crux, and then we Beam. That means that we can get about 3 out of 4.5 seconds, so we should try to Flail and Beam here. And as soon as the room explodes, I'm able to just spam my Y button and at least get a cast of Cloak off before we are able to even really move and start dropping dots on Zillyesset. And here is where I think I make the first true error in my timer management. I instinctively cast Scholarship alongside Cloak. Don't mind the fact that it's not leveled up to 4, by the way. But Scholarship has 4 seconds until it's going to expire. We coincidentally have 4 dots that we need to reapply on the boss before we should even consider hitting it. I do apply Scholarship here, which means that we lose ticks of damage that we could have had otherwise, so try to avoid just instinctively hitting skills together, especially during the room swap. You're going to min-max your damage by letting those play out more dynamically. So we get Fulminating and Trap down. I like to make Wall one of my last casts because half its value is in the back bar enchant, which we mainly use to buff our Fate Carver. So even though we'll lose a little bit of damage from Wall itself, I think it's worth the trade-off. So we get Fulminating, Trap, Wall, and Xena's down, followed by the flails necessary to get to 3 Crux, and then a Beam. With good stam management here, we're at 19%. And on the Zillyesset side, the Parse side, we're really going to focus on trying to use as many synergies as we can, while keeping our stam at that 33% threshold. So let's watch the timer management. So there are a couple of more things that I think I could have done better here. We take the Combustion right at 26%, and recognizing that that'll jump me up to about 40 to 45% stamina. Right as the Beam concludes, I bash weave a flail here, 2 times actually, to drop my stam immediately to 24%, so that we're not penalized from taking that combustion at all, really. We continue into another beam, and Wall is going to run out soon, as well as fulminating and then probably trap soon after. So we cast Flail to bar swap off of into Wall, into where the next mistake occurs in my opinion, another Flail, where it should have been a fulminating rune, followed by trap. And if that sequence played out correctly, it would have gone fulminating rune, trap, and then at that point Xena's on my back bar would have run out, and then I could have flailed, at which point Cloak would have been about ready to be reapplied, at which point Scholarship would have been ready to be reapplied. But instead what ends up happening is we do reapply Xena's in fulminating, but go straight into a beam, and we let trap, Cloak, and then eventually Scholarship run out for just a little too long. Good timer management there, straight into an ultimate at 175, right with the Pillager proc, by the way, which is the only reason we're going to get 5 total ults in the fight. Again, something that wouldn't have happened had we held our ult to this room. And here we need to start looking and preparing for the burst phase, the final burst phase of the fight, trying to kill these bosses at roughly the same time. You can see Zillyesset's HP is at about 7 mil when we go into this beam. So let's take a look and see what we're at afterwards. I want to point out here too that the stam management is pretty poor, most likely because we're trying to plan out this burst phase here. So try not to tunnel vision on one thing. Make sure that you don't forget to bash weave as necessary, especially if you're taking synergies. A mistake that I made here for sure. So at 4.4 mil, do you think that it is or is not worth reapplying Barb Trap? This is a bit of a trick question because we have some more priority dots running out, the main one being Wall. So whenever we use Flail to swap to the back bar, that's one GCD that's probably worth casting there. We erroneously make a cast of Cloak, which we're just going to ignore, and move to the back bar to cast Wall, and at this point, Zillyesset is at 3.4 mil. Had we bar swapped off of Trap, you can maybe make the argument that that would have been the correct decision, but now, at this point, since we're at 3 mil, it's definitely not worth reapplying Trap. One more thing to look at here. The boss is at 2.4 million HP, and we have an ultimate ready. Do you think we A, cast the ult, or B, just flail and beam? Ending the fight with, again, a little bit of a trick question here. Normally, I would say flail and beam. However, in this situation, we do have a damage dealer on our side of the room that's dead. This means that this execute phase is going to last a little bit longer than we initially thought it might, or than it usually does for that matter. So I will go ahead and cancel my beam, cast the ult, and then flail and beam until Zillyesset dies. And let's watch the damage meter and see if that's the correct decision. And in fact, right as the fight concludes, you can see we miss literally 1 tick of Fate Carver. So we still managed to cast our ultimate and get a full duration of our Fate Carver. And as a result, we gained about 5k DPS. Getting into the next set of trash, starting with the first pack, we will pre-buff with Cloak, Cruxweaver, and Proxy Det. Then we will throw Wall as the pull begins and spam Flail until the Arcasis proc is called out. If this is late for whatever reason and the ad is already almost dead, just spam Flail so that you can start the next pull with 3 Crux. Otherwise, you can hit Beam. Make sure that you're cleaving the small skeleton ads on all of these pulls to inflate your damage numbers a little bit, but more importantly, for safety. The skeletal necrotics are an absolute menace and can easily cause oddball deaths. If there are 1 or 2 small ads that go invulnerable ever from when a light ad dies, don't ever use beam on it. Just spam flail only so that you can build Crux and start the next pull with 3. For the second ad pull, the tank stack will slightly change how damage is performed here. In an arc-based comp, the best and quickest stack strat is to just pull the Acolyte forward, which means that you would position a group of Arcanists on the left and right side iridescence and beam through towards each other, and beaming through towards the other will result in the most damage and quickest kill. In this pack, killing the iridescence are the priority so that the small skeletal ads get resummoned as little as possible, but try to cleave towards those small ads as best as you can while focusing the elites. Pre-buff with Cloak, Scholarship, and Cruxweaver as necessary. Then while running in, we'll cast Proxy Det and Destro on the countdown, cast Wall as the pull starts, flail as many times as we need to get 3 Crux, and go into a beam. Remember, if any ads go gold barred, don't waste a beam cast on them, just spam flail so that you can start the next pull with 3 Crux. If the Ice Atro did not walk into the previous pull, we will simply use this solo ad as an opportunity to prepare for the next. Pre-buff with whatever you can get off and whatever you need to. As you run to the Ice Atro, you'll be able to get more abilities off the closer it is to the next pull, but once you get there, just cast Wall, flail the 3 Crux, and beam. But here I would suggest ending your beam early so that you can spam flail as the Ice Atro is dying to start the next pull with 3 crux. For this next pull, if you are on Riptide Deadly, make sure that your stamina is low. Pre-buff with your long ability timers since they've probably run out by now if you didn't get a chance to reapply them for the Ice Atro. Again, those are Cloak, Scholarship, and Crux Weaver. And for this pull, it takes a second for the very far separated adds to actually get stacked, so we have a little bit more time than normal. Position yourself in the center-ish area of the room, facing towards the Acolyte under the shelter. Cast Wall, roughly where the Iridescent should end up. Flail to 3 crux in beam, attempting to line up your beam so that it hits the Iridescent as it's walking in, towards the Acolyte under the shelter as it is walking in as well. Positioning is key here, just make sure that you're hitting the elite adds as much as you possibly can be. Pack 4 is another where we're going to throw an ultimate. Reminder, as long as your Souls on buff is active, we'll run Acuity Azure. The Firestorm is the priority in this pack, and the Dark adds usually get placed on the Acolyte to the right, so we want to position ourselves in a way that allow our beam to hit the 3 main adds in the stack, while also attempting to hit the Acolyte coming in from the left. This isn't always possible, especially because of the double Radiance casts here, but that is the goal. So as we leave the previous pull, we will pre-buff with Cloak, Scholarship, Crux Weaver, and Proxy. Then on the countdown, make sure you're close enough to the healer to receive the Pillager Barrier and get Slayer as needed. Drop Destro just before the pull starts, cast Wall, flail as many times as you need to get the 3 crux, and then beam, repeating flail and beam as needed until the pull is over. As a reminder, only cast flail if there are any leftover gold barred adds. This final ad pull is another preparation pack. Remember to save your potion for this pull since we'll be in Souls on Arcasis to ensure that we can start Cavot with a Destro. You can use your beam here to kill the skeletal adds, but I would strongly advise that you don't kill the necrotics until they get chained in. Otherwise, they will become far more difficult to control and interrupt with ults like the Atro or Colo from your tanks when the actual mini boss fight begins. If you don't know, these adds reincarnate whenever they die, so if they die too quick and are super spread out, they're just way more difficult to control. Once all the skeletal adds are dead, I only spam flail on the Ice Atro until it dies so that I can go into the first portion of the mini boss fight immediately with a beam as Cavot is spawning in, since he will be damageable for roughly 3 seconds before going invulnerable. And with that, getting into the mini boss fight. Cavot Agnan is a super bursty encounter. This boss will be damageable in roughly 30-second windows with roughly 5-second invuln phases, which creates a really unique burst rotation oriented around attempting to get our abilities to tick for as much damage as possible without it being necessary to reapply them. The group you're watching here does one-phase Cavot, which requires basically turning all of the support into DDs and a ton of damage on top of that. So if you're on console, just know that that's how it's being done. Rotationally, we get about 3 seconds to do burst damage to the boss when he lands, but we don't have enough time between boss swaps to go into a full pre-buff setup. So when the Atro dies, ideally you'll already have Cloak and Scholarship active, so we should cast Trap, Wall, Scalding, and then go into a beam just before the boss lands for some quick burst. This is where we see our first 5-second invuln phase. Since this is followed by a 30-second burst phase, we want to prioritize casts that are going to prepare our damage, while simultaneously allowing for as many ticks of all of our dots as possible, since it won't be worth reapplying anything once they run out. For example, if we cast Cloak as soon as the boss goes gold bar, it's only going to last for about 25 out of the 30-second burst window, and once it runs out, it won't be worth reapplying since there will only be 5 seconds left until the boss goes invuln again. This means Cloak is a skill that we want to delay a bit if possible. So what is worth casting? Well, Flail is responsible for a tiny amount of DPS in this fight, so as soon as the boss goes invuln, we will cast Flail twice to get back up to 3 crux. After this, we'll have about 3 to maybe 4 seconds left, so let's cast Scalding Rune, since it takes a couple seconds to arm. If you can risk it, Trap is good to cast next for the same reason, but cast it after Scalding since its dot timer lasts a few seconds shorter. Then we only have 1 or 2 seconds until the boss is damageable, so we will cast Cloak and Scholarship, our longer 30-second dots, that will now last nearly the entire burst phase, our ult so that we can get every tick of Pillager when it's cast, and hopefully have an ult back to throw a second time, then Fulminating, Wall, and straight into Fate Carver. The only skills we will reapply if we follow this order is Wall and our ultimate. Otherwise, we will flail and beam only until the boss is dead. So to break it down in fewer words, we will pre-buff the fight with everything that we possibly can and beam right before he comes down. Then our rotation simply goes Flail 2 times, Scalding, Cloak, Scholarship, Destro, Fulminating, Trap, Wall, Beam. We then reapply Wall and ult dynamically and spam only until the next invuln phase where we repeat the rotation. As a note, if the boss is super weak, roughly under maybe 5 mil by the time the next invuln phase occurs, skip fulminating and trap in the pre-buff altogether. Moving into the final set of trash, there are only 2 pulls and their duration makes them rather unique. The first pull is relatively straightforward. On my teams, I like to bring all of the adds to a specific stack point so that you can pre-buff literally everything. However, in this POV, we move to the acolytes. In either case, make sure that you cast Cloak, Scholarship, Cruxweaver, then Proxy, and then you can pre-place Wall and ult here if the adds are getting dragged to the group. Otherwise, cast your Destro on the 2 adds, then run to the pole, throw a Wall, hit Flail twice, and beam. The second part of this trash pack can be a bit of a cheesy way to increase your Hodor if you want to. You'll have a good 10 to 15 seconds before the Radiance becomes stacked and damageable. Here, you'll want to focus the small adds while they're getting stacked, attempting to line up your beam with their spawn. I hit beam until they're dead, Flail twice, pre-place a dot or 2 for the Radiance until those small adds respawn, beam again, and repeat. However, the priorities are the Radiance, so once the Radiance are in, make sure that Wall is hitting both of them, then just flail and beam until they're dead, attempting to point your beam towards those small adds that will continue to respawn. Make sure that you get your souls on proc so that you can go into the next pull in Azure Acuity. If any small adds are gold barred, spam flail only to build Crux for the next pull until the small adds die. This final pull has a unique burst component to it after the Acolyte are killed. To start, we will cast Cloak, Scholarship, Cruxweaver, and Proxy in transition. Usually this pack is stacked on the right side Acolyte, but there are 2 Firestorms, both of which need focused and both of which like to RP walk in sometimes. They'll usually end up just behind the backside Acolyte, so as we run into this pull, we'll need to aim our ult near the back of that Acolyte by just a hair. We should cast our Destro as the group is running in on the countdown, Wall once combat starts, then flail only as many times as we need to get to 3 Crux in beam. Focus on primarily hitting the dark adds with the beam here, especially the Firestorms. It's okay for the Acolytes to die a bit later and is even somewhat preferable for overall fight time. Once the dark adds die, if there's an Acolyte left over, the group can begin pre-dotting the crystal and go back into their beam casts, aiming towards the crystal just before that last Acolyte dies so that you get max burst damage on the Radiant that spawns. With some practice, killing this Radiant before it completes its invuln channel, even without ultimates, becomes very possible to do. So I would beam until the dark adds are dead, turn and make sure my pre-buff abilities are still active, cast Wall and maybe even trap on the crystal, get to 3 Crux before the Acolyte dies, and spam flail only until the Acolyte is under about 10% HP. If I start beaming here, I should get the full duration of Fate Carver on the Radiant when it spawns in with a full pre-dot. After this Radiant dies, run over to the other one, cast Wall, flail to 3 Crux, and spam only, aiming towards the small skeletal adds until the fight finishes. As always, if there are any small adds that are gold barred, spam flail on them once the elites are dead to start the next pull with 3 Crux. Most of these pulls are pretty short, but as a final note, especially for these last 2 ad packs, reapplying anything is rarely going to be worth it on an Arcanist and a trash pull. The only way recasting any sort of dot or AoE, even recasting Wall, would be worthwhile is if you're waiting for things to get stacked or if something is not immediately damageable. The best way to maximize your trash damage is by getting as many skills down as quickly as you can, but once everything is down, just spam only. Truly just use your spammable, and if everybody in your group bursts trash in this kind of way, things are going to die so fast that it's going to clearly not make sense to reapply dots and AoEs anyway. Moving into the Orphic Shattered Shard, the way that we actually perform this fight is very interesting. It is extremely burst oriented, and the burst revolves around the eyeball spawns and the mirror mechanic. The fight begins with 3 waves of adds. At the beginning, if you really hug the wall, you can make it to your mirror if you're quick enough before the adds fully spawn in so that you can hit the mirror as the fight begins. Note though that synergizing the mirror will start the fight, so wait for the countdown. In this series of trash, casting trap and fulminating just won't be worthwhile, so make sure that you have Cloak, Scholarship, Caltrops, and Wall active. Then simply flail and beam only. If you have your ult, you can use it on this first wave of adds, but I'd advise holding it for the boss if you get it back any later, just in case. Once the first series of adds is dead, you will have a second to go hit mirrors while the next set is being stacked. Make sure that you're casting abilities like Cloak, Scholarship, and then flail to build Crux while you are moving away, and then you can drop your AoEs and apply Abyssal Ink as necessary. Abyssal Ink is worthwhile in this trash pull because the ads have double the health of the elites in previous packs, and that lower health would mean that you sometimes don't even get to finish your beam if you take the extra GCD to apply the debuff. Once you make your cast of dots and AoEs though, only use your spammable until this set dies, and here I do like to finish with beam and position myself so that the beam is immediately turned and facing towards the new Runok that spawns. After the beam finishes, I'll get my AoEs back out and Crux built, and then spam only until the Runok is dead. During these trash packs, I'm supposed to be the group hitting the mirrors just before the boss spawns, which means I'm not supposed to have a chance to get a good pre-dot on the Shattered Shard. To solve this, I follow the person hitting my mirror out when they go to flip the room to make the Sentinel damageable, while pre-dotting with AoEs, Cloak, Scholarship, and Crux building as necessary. And then I hit my mirror as soon as the room fully flips, walking back in, casting Fate Carver. Up to 3 DDs can do this, the 4th obviously cannot, or the room will flip again. You could just have a healer be the one to hit the 4th mirror if you really want to maximize damage on the boss. Either way, I spam beam until the Sentinel is at about 1 mil, then I start my pre-buff on the boss. This first 10% gets melted very quickly, and getting into your beam as soon as possible is the only way that you're going to do solid damage to the boss right off the rip. When the Sentinel is at 1 mil, I like to throw traps so that I can back away from the boss so as not to get stunned by the explosion. Then I cast Cloak, Scholarship, Caltrops, and Wall in that order, which is just determined based off of duration, casting the longer duration abilities first. And then once the fight begins, the boss will probably be momentarily gold barred, so we can cast Flail for the debuff, then Fulminating. After this, we wait for the room to flip before casting our ultimate and going straight into a beam. Again, this first 10% will get pushed very fast, so we will only use our spammable until he becomes gold barred. This entire sequence is fairly representative of the entire fight. Our damage on the Shattered Shard is maximized based on how well we pre-buff, as well as understanding your group's burn well enough to spot out the burst phases. The mirror mechanic in general takes about 10 seconds to complete, and the ones that happen at 90 and 60% are delayed about another 5 seconds, since 2 new mirrors spawn in, and that's only assuming that the DDs hitting the new mirrors are extremely quick. So this fight feels like we just kind of have a lot of downtime. However, we want to be analyzing 2 key factors. First of all, this fight again is just so bursty, and sustain with Pragmatic is so easy that it's not uncommon for our stamina to get above 20%, which is roughly the point that we are able to comfortably take a combustion without our stam shooting above 33% for Riptide. So while this phase is channeling, I like to make sure that I have 3 Crux by spamming Flail on the boss, and then I use Camo Hunter to dump stamina to about 10%. For the 90 and 60 phases, once the mirror mech finishes channeling is when I start pre-buffing. Pre-buffing too early means that your dots and AoEs aren't going to get as many ticks as they could on the boss because they'll be doing damage when the boss is invuln. The goal of a good pre-buff is to time your ability casts so that as soon as the boss is damageable, you've gone through all of your dots and AoEs and are naturally on the next GCD where your beam should be cast. So again, here at 90% when the mirror mech finishes channeling, we should already be at 3 Crux, so the pre-buff should go Cloak, Scholarship, Trap, Fulminating, Caltrops, Wall, and if we time it correctly, the boss should be damageable just after we cast Wall, where we will then ult and beam. If it is taking some time to get the mirrors swapped for one reason or another, make sure that you prioritize refreshing your short timers, primarily Caltrops and Wall. The next mirror mechanic occurs at 60%, however, at 80%, a Fate Sealer will spawn. This requires the boss to move to a completely new location, out of all of your AoEs. For this reason, I like to use my spammable only from 90 to 80%, and usually by the time 80 hits and the boss summons the Fate Sealer, both Trap and Fulminating will need to be reapplied. So I cast Trap as the boss is summoning the Fate Sealer, Fulminating as the boss begins moving, and then I turn to the eyeball and cast Caltrops and Wall on it so that the boss can walk into it. If Cloak and Scholarship also need to be reapplied here, feel free to do so, but try to do this as dynamically as possible. I sometimes will and sometimes won't get an ultimate back here, and it will vary depending on where your group is using Pillager. But if you get your ult above 65%, go ahead and cast it. Once you've reapplied all these abilities at the new location though, you should be able to just spam only until the boss ports into the center, assuming a clean fight. If the fight is not going well, consider reapplying Wall and Caltrops, but Cloak and Scholarship just shouldn't need to be reapplied a second time, and Trap and Fulminating won't be worth reapplying under 65%. And frankly, if the boss is about 5% away from the mirror mechanic, none of our dots and AoEs will be worth reapplying. From here on out, it's pretty much rinse and repeat. Enough talk, let's go ahead and look at a walkthrough. I chose this example because it was a pretty decent parse before I had really mastered the exact order of skills that I wanted to cast for the pre-buff, and it also includes a couple of mistakes to take a good look at as well. We were frying this boss right up until the very end though, and you'll see why. So with that, let's take a look. So we'll take it from the beginning. When we pull these first two adds, I was not the first mirror to hit, so we're going to lay all of the dots and AoEs that we can get out, and then as soon as we're able to, we're just going to go straight into beam. It's not going to be worth reapplying any dots or AoEs or anything like that, so just spam only until these adds die. Then after that, it is my turn to go hit the mirrors, so I'll lay some AoEs as I run away, and then I'll build Crux on my way back, trying to flail the Runox, but mostly just trying to get into that beam as quickly as possible. I do have my ultimate ready here, but I'm not going to drop it in fear of not getting it back in time for the actual boss fight. And if we take it back here just a little bit, you'll notice that as soon as these Runox die, I press myself up against them and then flip my beam to the right. This is so that I can start immediately hitting the Runox when it spawns for a little bit of extra damage. When that beam finishes, I'll hit Flail on the Runox, followed by reapplying my AoEs on the ground, in addition to a Fulminating, which you could argue against, and I probably wouldn't do in the future. But as soon as this Runox dies, you'll notice it's the other group's turn to hit the mirror. I'm trailing my partner though, so that whenever the room fully flips, as you can see it turns dark, I pre-flip my mirror and then go straight into a beam on the Sentinel once my dots and AoEs are down. This will allow me to get a pre-buff off on the boss without having to run all the way over to the mirror and maybe lose some ticks of damage by either having to pre-dot skills early or late. So as soon as the Sentinel dies, I'll put a trap in the middle, and then I'll start backing up to throw caltrops in wall. And right here, I do get thrown back, but if I'm being honest, I feel like I was far enough away. That is definitely going to mess up the pre-buff. So what I've begun to do here instead is drop trap and then cloak in scholarship as I run away, caltrops in wall as the boss becomes damageable, and then I will cast fulminating followed by my ultimate. The room does get flipped pretty quickly here though, so that ultimate wasn't really an erroneous cast, but as soon as all of our dots and AoEs are down, we're going to go straight into that beam, and we're going to spam only until 90%. And notice here, we do get a pretty solid peak, but I've seen this get as high as about 200k if this is done perfectly. So if everybody in your group pre-dots that way, you're going to nuke this first 10% before you even get a chance to do a second beam. Now we go to our first mirror mechanic. Here, I hit my mirror at 60% when it spawns. So while we're just waiting in the center, we're going to keep an eye on this Sentinel that's spawning to our left. It is fully our job to dodge the ad because it's not tauntable as it's spawning, and it will target you as it's spawning. So we avoid getting hit by this ad by going in and out to hit our mirror extremely quickly, and then also being aware of the shield throw that's inevitably going to come into group when the Sentinel spawns at 90 and 60%. So we're going to get the shield throw any second now. And then remember, the timing of this is not quite where I started it. I would start pre-dotting at 90 and 60 whenever the room fully blows up, right about here, because it'll take another roughly 5 seconds for the mirrors to spawn and for the corresponding damage dealers to go out and synergize them. So the way that this should work is while the room is channeling, dump your stam, build Crux, and apply Abyssal Ink to the boss. And then when the room blows up, we'll cast Cloak, Scholarship, Trap, Fulminating, caltrops, wall. Then the boss should just become damageable at this point, where we will cast ultimate and beam. Now, as you can see, because we were waiting for a little bit longer than we would have been otherwise, caltrops and wall get about half their duration, so I do reapply them here while we're still waiting. If you're in a situation where maybe the DDs are slow and the room's not flipping, prioritize reapplying skills like caltrops and wall that are shorter, and reapply your longer dots if it's taking even longer, obviously. But the goal is, as soon as the boss becomes damageable, cast ult and then go straight into your beam. Now remember, our next burst percentage threshold is 80%. This is where the boss will spawn the Fate Sealer. So we will continue to use our spammable here as the boss spawns the Fate Sealer because our trap and fulminating had not run out yet. But whenever we get out of that beam, we're going to cast caltrops in wall at the new location, followed by fulminating, and then trap, and then scholarship to get all of our dots and AoEs back down. And throughout this entire process, we're now down another 10%. So there's only 10% left until this boss is pushed until the mirror mechanic. So let's pause here for a quick second. Do you think that it's going to be worth reapplying any more dots and AoEs at this point? Yes or no? For just about any group in any situation, if this boss slams on the eyeball at 70%, you are not going to need to touch anything besides your spammable. So as you can see, we start cooking the boss a bit here. and 65% is right about that point where we talked about if you have any dots that have expired above this threshold, reapply them. However, caltrops and wall each have a couple of seconds left, so we're just going to flail and beam. And I mean, look at the damage that's peaking as a result. We are frying this boss. So we do finally hit 60% at a 103k single target. We're going to get the Pillager Barrier. We're going to pop Echoing and try to stack that as many times as we can on everybody. Look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stacks of Echoing makes this phase super safe. And then we wait. We're going to build the 3 Crux. And then when the room explodes, we're going to start pre-buffing. Not actually here, because I do it a little bit earlier than I suggest, but normally start pre-buffing right as the room explodes. So that pre-buff goes Cloak, Scholarship, Trap, Fulminating, Caltrops, Wall. And then as you can see, we're just out here kind of RPing, and our dots are ticking on the boss, and the room isn't flipped yet, so that's where we lose the damage. About 3 seconds too early. But as soon as the boss is damageable, ult, and then beam. Now, recently, this group has pushed this phase so fast that we skip the Fate Sealer altogether. That would make bursting in this kind of way even more valuable. However, you'll see that after this second beam, we will end up getting a Fate Sealer right at about 45%. So we'll build the 3 Crux, cast Caltrops and Wall, and keep in mind, this boss is going to slam and then immediately port to the center. So I don't feel that it's worth reapplying sticky dots like Trap, Fulminating, or Cloak at this point. You can make the argument to reapply Scholarship since it only has 3 seconds left and is a prio dot. But either way, we're pretty much just going to reapply Scholarship. Cloak was a cast that I completely disagree with, and we will spam only until this boss goes to the center. We'll try to pop Echoing here. And then now that there are no more new mirrors that need to be spawned, as soon as this phase ends, the boss will be damageable. So right about here, you want to start your pre-buff halfway through this mechanic. Take a look at the add-on here, and if you're on console, that's about when the AoE is getting ready to touch the mirrors, maybe a little bit less. So try to screenshot this image in your brain. Where you see the AoE now is about halfway through the mechanic's duration. So we'll cast Cloak, Scholarship, Trap, Fulminating, Caltrops, Wall, ult, then beam. And we'll beam one more time here as Caltrops and Wall run out, but as you can see, at the end of this beam, the boss just gets pushed to 15%, immediately back into the mirror phase, skipping the Fate Sealer mechanic altogether, and if your group bursts correctly, as we've seen, that's what's possible with this fight. So it's right about here that we'll see the cardinal sin, the big mistake that I make in the fight. We go to hit our mirror, and then the Runok spawns, and the rest is history. Let's rewind that and take a closer look. So this death 100 out of 100 times is the damage dealer's fault. And the reason is, I should already be at my mirror. We are about 2.5 to almost 3 seconds into the mirror phase mechanic where the boss is invulnerable. And yes, it was maybe a little difficult to anticipate, but if I'm pre-positioned where I'm supposed to be when this mechanic happens, to instantly flip my mirror, I'm never in the situation where a Runok spawns on top of me and then immediately light attacks. So right here, just so you know from the tanking perspective, the Runok becomes tauntable literally in this frame. And not more than 3 or 4 frames later is he already lunging a light attack at my back here, right? So this is impossible, simply impossible for the tank to grab before it hits me. The number one way that I live is by being to my mirror quicker. Another huge perk is if all the DDs are pre-positioned at their mirrors, all of these ads that you see right here become chainable well before the room explodes, well before this Runok needs to be taunted, and it's just safer for everybody. The tank's ad control is better, everybody's able to get bashes better, everybody hits their mirror and gets back into healing quicker. It's just so much better. But if you're in the situation where you are late because you made a mistake, all you need to do is roll dodge literally the second you see this ad spawn. I mean, I thought that I was okay all the way over here, but I clearly was not. So make sure that you roll dodge if you see an ad spawn near you, and this won't happen. So let's take a second here and look at an execute that was a little bit cleaner. The boss goes invuln right here at 15%, and I still get to my mirror pretty slowly here, not anticipating that correctly, but don't get unlucky with the Runok spawning on me. So I probably should have been building Crux as I was running out, though I might not really have had time to, but either way, build 3 Crux and then cast Cloak, Scholarship, and then right here we wanted to cast Trap. However, I have a Runok that I'm worried about right here, and an AoE that if I step in, I'm guaranteed to die. So we make the decision to cast Caltrops and Wall, although it probably should have been Fulminating Caltrops Wall as I rounded back into the group and then was able to cast Trap. Now right here, you'll notice that I hold my ultimate because we just got a pillager that was called out. Normally in this situation, go ahead and throw your Dawnbreaker if you don't have a languid back, and then spam only until the boss is dead. Because I know that we're getting a pillager though, I'm going to wait for a second until I have my ult. It'll be ready right as the beam finishes, so I can bar swap, languid, and then simply flail and beam until the boss is dead. Finally, getting into the final boss of the trial. This one is a doozy. The constant state of combat makes the encounter all the way to Xoryn one that is extremely bursty and opens up a world of really niche and unique ways that you can increase your overall DPS output. The crystals are the priority targets in each and every room. This will determine both your single target damage in logs and your overall fight time, so getting them killed quickly is of the utmost importance. Once the fight begins, we will be running down the stairs to the Manticora. We are immediately in combat, so we can go ahead and pre-build to 3 Crux as we are running, in addition to activating skills like Cloak and Scholarship as a pre-buff before moving into the first room. Once these things are all done, I like to cast Fulminating on the Manticora, in addition to Flail for Abyssal Ink, and I try to lay Trap down for it to walk through, but this sometimes does get eaten by a skeleton. At this point, we get to our first crystal, and here our opening is mostly determined by the range of our abilities. Caltrops has the longest range, so it's the first ability that we throw, followed by Fulminating and then Wall. At this point, we should be right on top of the crystal, trying to take as many synergies as we can, and I'll simply cast Flail for Abyssal Ink and then Beam. If the first crystal has over a mil health remaining after going through a full Pragmatic and Flail sequence, go ahead and Beam again here, since we have another decent run that will give us enough time to rebuild Crux. This next room can be a little tricky. You either have to absolutely blow these first 2 crystals up so that you can fracture in the first mini-boss room, or more commonly, it's far safer to wait a second or two after the fracture to kill this crystal in order to guarantee that everybody is ready and together for the mini-boss. He will aggro about 3, maybe 4 seconds after the barrier is open, so you don't have a lot of time. In any case, as we run into this room, make sure that you are at 3 Crux, cast Caltrops, Fulminating, Wall, Flail, and Beam. I cancel my beam here at about 1 mil and spam Flail only to kill the crystal so that I can walk into the next room with 3 Crux to burst down the mini-boss a little bit more efficiently. The first mini-boss room can be handled in one of 2 ways. You can attempt to just nuke the mini in order to skip the tether mechanic here, and this was a popular way of handling the fight when tether was bugged and would randomly kill one of the players holding the mech. This is an overall fight time loss though, so what I have started transitioning to in my groups is simply cleaving Dariel and focusing the crystals. Dariel will not move while channeling the tether, so the initial stack point can be on the right crystal, and then the tank can move to the left crystal while the tether is spawning, because the very next mech is his port, so the tank can easily have Dariel port to the crystal on the left into all of the cleave. In any case, this only changes when you stop damage on the crystal. For this room, I like to leave the previous room with 3 Crux, cast Cloak and Scholarship as necessary in transition, then lead in with Caltrops, Destro, Fulminating, and Wall. Casting Destro first may result in slightly more damage, but aiming while walking in here can be a little troll sometimes, so I cast Caltrops to establish my bearings. Fulminating does get cast on the boss despite the crystal being the priority. It's very easy to accidentally kill this first crystal too quick because of all of the ults going out, so any extra dots just aren't necessary. Once the stack is set, Flail and Beam. If you are trying to skip tether, face your beam away from the crystal once it hits about 50%. If you are focusing the crystal, cancel your beam and move to the next one when it hits about 30%. Pro tip, for some added insane AoE damage, position yourself in the center of the 2 crystals towards the tank, because if the off tank knows what he's doing, he can get the Ice Atro to port right on top of Dariel here pretty much as you start beaming, so your goal is to hit Dariel, the Ice Atro, and the crystal. Once it's time to move, the mini should either be dead or low enough health that it's not worth considering if the cleave is where it needs to be, so we'll fully focus on the crystal. Cast Caltrops, Fulminating, Wall, Flail for Abyssal Ink, and 3 Crux, and then Beam. Flail and Beam only until the crystal is dead. Attempt to maximize your cleave by hitting the Atro and the mini as much as possible. Once both crystals are dead, spam only on the mini if he happens to be alive, otherwise try to position yourself near the exit door. Watch out for the healers though. If you are fast enough, tether will still be active. To handle this, I have my healers stand on the left side of the wall and the DDs rotate to the right side of the wall to keep moving. You might not think that the hallways of this fight are relevant, but there are 2 key concepts I want to discuss. The first revolves around doing damage. If there is still an Atro alive, try to get whatever whatever sticky dots you have on it so that it dies in transition, and feel free to cast caltrops in wall for it to walk through as well. Likewise, for any atro that spawns in the hallway, you should be able to get a decent pre-dot on it. Cast caltrops in wall on the player fracturing, then run up and throw trap plus fulminating on the atro. If everyone does this, you can chunk a mil off the atro's health in transition easily, which is going to help it die much faster once it's stacked in the damage. The second main concept is one that has a bit of contention with my groups recently, and it revolves around the atro slams. This is a tank mechanic that a damage dealer fully needs to know and be aware of, because I will die on this hill. Any slam death can be prevented by the player who died to it, and is therefore more on the player who died than on the tank. This is 100% of the case in hallways, but has some scenarios that make that 100% closer to 90 in boss rooms. The bottom line with slams is that they are extremely desynced for both the players that see them and for the actual tank. Furthermore, there are a variety of factors that can result in slams happening in slightly different places or occasionally in a random mech order. This makes this mechanic one that you can't predict 100% of the time, but one that you just have to be hyper aware of and be ready to react to. Having the tank hug the left side of the hallway and the DDs hug the right side will solve a lot of problems, but it still leaves open room for small inconsistencies here and there. Take it into your own hands, and if that slam is anywhere, and I mean anywhere near you, time out the roll dodge with the slam AoE. With the nitty gritty no death strat out of the way, let's talk about doing damage on the next mini boss, Baron Rise. This boss can be a little tricky, and doing good damage really depends on group burn. The goal is to get one beam off between meteor phases. Pre-buff, as always, in the previous hallway with 3 Crux, Cloak, and Scholarship, then walk in and throw caltrops, wall, fulminating, trap, flail for abyssal ink, and beam. You might ask, why not ult? Well, normally I don't quite have a destro, and we get a pillager after the first set of meteors. The next point where I drop an ult anyway is during the necros. I don't have time to drop an ult on the crystal before the necros and then get it back for them in this group, so I'll let my ult get to 250, drop an ult a little bit later, and let it cook with its full duration plus bloodthirsty jewelry, and ensure that I get a full beam before the first set of meteors. This group is super quick, nearly skipping the second meteors altogether. In groups that get a third set of meteors, I'd recommend reapplying wall and caltrops during the first set of meteors if you are already at 3 Crux. You'll have to block cast here for a couple of seconds, so you can't really flail or beam anyway, and these are the only 2 dots that will expire if you're not skipping the third set of meteors. So reapplying them here will help ensure that all of your dots and AoEs are down, and that you're bursting with your spammable only whenever you don't have to block cast. If the fight goes on for much longer than that, you'll have to maintain a more mainstream rotation, attempting to reapply some dots during meteors and going into beam as quickly as possible once the meteors end. If everyone in your group bursts like this though, especially the Arcanist with good support uptimes, you should have no trouble skipping the third set. In this next hallway, practice the principles that we discussed earlier. Cast sticky dots on any active ice atro, make sure that you pre-dot the player that is fracturing, leave caltrops and wall behind you, and mechanically both stay with the knot and make sure that you roll dodge slams if they're anywhere near you. Additionally, this is the first time we see the hallway beams. If you do not see their yellow animation indicating the beam is active, or a red carpet indicating that the mech is going to spawn, it is bugged. That means that the beams are channeling and going to go off without any warning. If this is the case, try to roll dodge past each beam so that you don't get hit by it in case it happens to go off while you're moving through it. The next room is arguably one of the trickiest to handle well. It starts with a crystal that roams around the room in a circle, and here we will start a regular rotation, entering the room with 3 Crux plus Cloak and Scholarship active. Then we will place caltrops in front of the crystal for it to move into, followed by fulminating and then wall. Here I like to kind of try to angle wall so that the crystal gets hit by it a bit longer. We will then flail for abyssal ink and then spam only until the crystal is finished. If you have room for a pillager here, feel free to throw an ulti on it. This is where the room gets complicated. There are 2 main strats that exist to handle the necro room. One is faster and one is a bit safer and more consistent in my opinion. The burn strat involves having a tank and healer run to the bottom of the stairs to the far crystal to stack all of the necros. Here you will wait for the first set of necrotic rain to occur, at which point you will be running to meet the tank at the stack point. As you pass the first crystal, throw a fulminating rune on it, skip the center completely, building Crux as you move, and then throw caltrops, destro, wall, and beam only on the necros. If everything goes perfectly, you should be able to skip the second rain, but if you do get it, somebody is almost guaranteed to die. This can occur as a result of a poor necro stack, bad RNG with the necros walking away mechanic, bad damage, or late group arrival. It's really easy to mess up. Make sure that you're watching for the necro's fear ghost and that you don't get hit by it so that you don't get stunned, especially when you start your beam. After the necros are dead, you should split the group so that 3 DDs are on the entrance crystal, 1 DD is on the center, and 4 DDs are on the far crystal. This is because we had all 8 damage dealers drop dots on the entrance as we passed it, so it should be a little lower. Once the necros are dead, the group should get the center crystal to around 40% and then split to the entrance and far crystals. I pretty much cast wall and spam only on the center, then I drop every single ability in my toolkit on the split crystal, building to 3 crux as I run, plus pre-buffing with cloak and scholarship if needed, then casting destro, caltrops, wall, trap, fulminating, and flail in beam only until the crystal dies. After this, it's pretty safe to stop and burn the atro. If it's full health, I cast caltrops, wall, and fulminating, then spam only since it should only have about 5 to 6 mil HP. The second strat requires a bit more positioning awareness and is a little slower, but is far easier to recover if something goes wrong. For that reason, I prefer this strat for the no death. The tank will run to the bottom solo and bring the necros up to the group. For this to work well, the group needs to attempt to hug the back wall as best as possible without stacking on each other during necrotic rain, because the tank grabbing them will rely on soft aggro to stack them. So the group needs to be out of range, and the necro's range is absurdly massive. I have the player holding the knot drop the first skull AoE near the staircase, then immediately move up to the top half of the room to drop the other 2 on the right side wall facing that exit staircase. If the first AoE goes into group due to the knot fracture timing, the player kiting the AoE should just move to the top half of the room regardless of where the first AoE was placed. You should throw a barrier for the first set of rain, and a barrier just before the group moves, which, if done correctly, should occur before the second set of rain, and this will prevent the necros from zerging one player down. Once the group moves, the rotation is the same. I cast caltrops, destro, wall, and beam. With this strat, after the necros are dead, we should then move to the crystals, and here I feel it very helpful to avoid casting sticky dots since we will have all 8 DDs on each crystal at one time. Having the ability to control the burn to get the crystal extremely low without accidentally killing it is going to be the quickest way to handle this portion of the fight. Because this run is so short, we can prioritize casting cloak and scholarship first so that we get some extra damage with flail once we get there. Then simply cast caltrops and wall and spam only until the crystal reaches about 20%. As a pro tip, I start counting down to get ready to leave in 3, 2, 1 once the crystal passes 40%, and it should end at about 20 if done correctly. As we pass the center, cast fulminating on it in addition to our pre-buff skills, flail, cloak, and scholarship as necessary. But don't get this one too low, we will ulti dump it so it's going to die fast. On the far crystals, same thing, caltrops, wall, and spam only until it gets to 20%. Then we will move to the center and cast caltrops, wall, and ult. At this point, we will only use flail until the crystal reaches about 60%, at which point we will split 4 and 4 to the entrance and far crystals, where we should be able to walk over and only hit beam. The ults and dots should finish the crystal in the center, and the 4 arc beams on each crystal should nuke the last 20% so that all 3 crystals die at roughly the same time. If there are 2 ice atros, I would at least kill the low health one, and if your tank is comfortable, you can then move. Otherwise, you can kill both and then move. We have one more hallway to worry about. Remember to watch for slams and invisible beams, as well as get as many sticky dots on atros as you can. If you have some extra time, I like to wait for the knot fracture at the end of the hall and move in on a fresh knot. And if you find yourself waiting, parse any atro that may be alive. This corner just before the boss room currently has a really strange bug to look out for. The slam, for whatever reason, can end up being invisible, so make sure that you stay away from your tank and that the tank waits to get the slam before moving through the group. It will not be avoidable. And now the final encounter before the final boss, the double mini room. There are quite a few ways to do this room. The safest strat for the tank, in my opinion, that gives them the most space is to hold them in the center. If your burn is really good, you can kill the crystals and then the minis. It's a little faster because your group can just kill the crystal while the stack is being created. However, nuking the stack and then handling the crystals is the absolute safest way to handle the room. The safest way to handle the fight for just the damage dealers is to move to the right staircase where the mage spawns and create a stack point there. This will outrange the detonation AoEs placed on the DDs, but give your tanks less space to work with. The quickest and probably most difficult stack, though, is to place everything on a crystal. This creates a lot of danger for the tanks, but if they can pull it off, will result in the best fight time. Each strat slightly changes the way that I do damage. For the burn strat, I would usually have the group start on the entrance left crystal, the crystal opposite of where the group enters, and place the stack on that entrance right crystal. The group should get the first one low enough to be finished by dots, plus maybe 1 damage dealer on it, leaving at about 20% to the entrance crystal to ulti dump. To do this, pre-buff with 3 crux, cloak, and scholarship in the hallway, then cast caltrops, fulminating, and wall on the crystal, and spam only until it reaches about 20%. After this, I would turn back to entrance and cast everything on the mage. If the mage dies, the tanks can easily move to the next stack point, and the crystal can become the absolute priority. So I would cast caltrops, fulminating on the mage, wall, ult, and trap if you can get in there, and then spam only until the crystal dies. At this point, turn around and finish the first crystal if necessary, then go back to the minis. You should only have to reapply Caltrops, Wall, and Scholarship if the burn is good, but I wouldn't ever reapply Fulminating, Trap, or Cloak on the mini bosses here, even if the burn is slower. Your beam is going to carry damage in this room, and those sticky dots just won't be worth the cast a second time. I would save the next ult that I get back at this point for the next room. The stair stack is a bit more simple. Start on the entrance crystal and get it to about 30%, avoiding sticky dots so as not to accidentally kill it. Pre-buff in the hallway with 3 Crux, Cloak, and Scholarship, and then cast Caltrops and Wall in the crystal, flail, and beam only until it gets to about 30%. We will then move to the stack point. This group finishes both minis here without the possibility of moving it to a crystal stack, so I avoid casting trap altogether and only cast fulminating one time so that somebody can get the rune break synergy. So our rotation will go Caltrops, Wall, fulminating on the melee boss since he'll be a little bit higher health getting stacked last, flail for Abyssal Ink, and then spam. You will probably have to reapply Caltrops and Wall one time here, maybe even Scholarship. But if the minis are both under 5 mil at any point in time, spam only. Never reapply Trap, Cloak, or Fulminating right here though. Once the minis die, you can have 1 or 2 DDs on the original crystal to finish it off, and the rest of the group can rotate to the far one. Make sure that you've pre-buffed with Cloak and Scholarship as a priority here, since the run is short, and then get to 3 Crux as necessary. Cast Caltrops, Fulminating, Wall, flail for Abyssal Ink, and then spam only on the high health crystal. If you are on the low health crystal, only cast Wall, flail, and beam. Finally, the super safe strat. It doesn't matter if you choose to kill the crystals first or last, your rotation will be roughly the same. If you start on the crystals, pre-buff with 3 Crux, Cloak and Scholarship in the hallway, then cast Caltrops, Fulminating, Wall, flail for Abyssal Ink, and beam until the crystal hits 30%. Once it does, repeat that rotation on the high health crystal, Caltrops, Fulminating, Wall, flail for 3 Crux and or Abyssal Ink, and spam only until this crystal dies. Once it does, turn and finish the original as necessary. Once it's time to kill the minis, you won't really be waiting for one to stack more than the other, so it doesn't matter where Fulminating ends up. We will avoid casting Trap and reapplying Cloak though. Those abilities won't be worthwhile here. Pre-buff with Scholarship, then cast Caltrops, Fulminating, Wall, ult, flail to 3 Crux, and beam. You will probably have to reapply Caltrops, Wall, and maybe even Scholarship with this strat, but don't recast Cloak, Trap, or Fulminating Rune. Once the minis are under 5 mil, make sure Wall is down, and then spam only. Finally, we only have 2 more crystals to kill. You can either split 4 and 4, or work on the same one together. I personally prefer the group sticking together, as I've found faster fight times that way. But do what works best for your group. In either case, you'll make sure that you build Crux in transition, and pre-buff with Cloak and Scholarship as necessary. Then we will do our crystal rotation. Caltrops, Fulminating, Wall, flail for Abyssal Ink, and beam. If you are doing 4 and 4, spam only until the crystal is dead, then turn and build Crux plus beam on the other crystal until it is dead. If you are zerging the crystals, get 1 to 30%, repeat this rotation on the other one, fully killing it, and then turn to finish the original. In the PC POV that you've been watching, we move into the next room to finish our Atro once the crystal is dead, where I pre-dot Caltrops, Wall, and Trap, in addition to our regular pre-buff with 3 Crux, Cloak, and Scholarship, so that I cast Fulminating, Flail, and Beam when the Atro ports in, spamming only until it dies. In my groups that I lead though, I've grown fond of staying in the double mini room to kill the Ice Atro, and having the Knot move ahead at 10 seconds to fracture with the healers, to give the DDs a better chance at killing the Ice Atro before moving into the Xoryn room. Place the Atro on the opposite crystal that the group starts on, and if it happens correctly, you should only have to reapply Caltrops and Wall if they're going to expire above 3 mil on the Atro. If the Atro is under 3 mil, spam only. The only important thing to note about this room is that it acts as a bit of a purgatory. You want to ensure that you start Xoryn on a fresh Knot so that the Knot's fracture never lines up with a mirror mechanic. It's up to you and your group how risky you want to play it. The safest thing to do is to go in with all Atros dead on a fresh Knot, but you can leave Atros alive and or low-ish health if you want to go in on a specific Knot as well. Finally, the grand finale, Xoryn. I feel like people really overthink this boss and try to plan the rotation directly around the mechanics instead of letting the fight flow more organically. This really is just a straight parse dummy fight with a little bit of movement and the occasional block. The way to really maximize your damage is by understanding the damage that you're going to take. I see people so often freak out after getting hit by chain because their health moves to 50%, and they try to react and recover, and then all of their dots fall off, and then their rotation becomes a mess, and it just spirals. Most of the damage can be pragged through though, and unless you're holding the current, the only damage you will take is from chain lightning and mirrors. So let's start there. First off, mirror lines cannot be shielded or blocked. You can only take 1 line. If you take 2, you're dead. It's that simple. You will not take any additional damage during this mechanic. you're going to get hit one time and that's it. It doesn't matter if you sit at 10k health for the next 6 seconds, as long as you get any healing before the following chain lightning, you're fine. Don't waste time trying to cast any defensives during mirror lines, just maintain your rotation. So with that, the other main source of damage is chain lightning. This will hit you for 30k unblocked and up to 20k if it is blocked. This means that if you are channeling pragmatic, you are guaranteed to live. I'll say it again, you cannot die to chain lightning if you are in a 3 crux beam. After chain, nothing is going to damage you. It doesn't matter if you're low health for a couple of seconds, so don't panic. Similarly, if you block, you also cannot be killed. Your health may get a little low doing either one of these, but you won't take any damage for another 10 seconds, so let your healers work and continue parsing. What this means in terms of damage is that if we are naturally in the middle of our beam during a chain lightning, we are safe. If we are instead reapplying dots, then just block cast. It's that simple. Don't change your rotation for this fight. The only danger is casting flail during a chain. If you want to be super safe, just avoid flail until you see your health bar move. That's how you know that you've been hit. However, if you block cancel the ability, there's only a 0.3 second window that exists for you to get hit by chain, which can happen, but probably won't. So do with that what you will. One little trick I use is that I'll move closer to the boss or further away to try to get my chain to happen either faster or slower, depending on if I need to cast flail or not in this situation. For example, if a chain is right about to go out and I'm at 2 crux with all dots and AoEs refreshed, I'll back up, cast flail, and then go into a beam, so that I'm not one of the first people in that 3-second window to get hit, but instead one of the last, guaranteeing that I get hit 2 seconds later. Finally, if you have a barrier active, it is impossible to die to chain. Be careful of this though, because I have had it happen where I had a barrier when the chain started going out, but I took so little damage over the course of its 30-second duration that the barrier just ran out right before I got hit by chain and I died. I wish I had a clip. It's a real unicorn of a situation, but I guess one to be aware of. The only time that you have to block is when you're taking chain lightning while holding the current. The fluctuating current ramps up in damage over time. The first 10 seconds really don't do much. So if I'm grabbing the current during a chain lightning, I can easily prag through it because it's only a 30k tick of chain plus maybe a 5k tick of current with 35 to 40k effective health when I combine my health stat with my shield value. So using pragmatic during chain, while initially holding the current is fine. However, near the end of its duration, it can tick for 12 to 15k. A 30k tick of chain plus a 15k tick of current is a little too much. Here, I need to block to bring the chain lightning damage down to 20k, and then hit impervious to still bring my effective health up to 40 to 45k, with my health pool plus impervious here as opposed to my health pool plus pragmatic. This will bring my effective damage taken down to about 35k. We only hit impervious while holding current so that we can block and shield. We only need to block and shield if we've been holding the current for more than 10 seconds and we are getting chain lightning. You do not need to regularly shield through this mechanic. Your healers should be able to handle it. The last bit of relevance mechanically in this fight revolves around the mirror lines while holding fluctuating current. Remember, the mirror lines cannot be mitigated and they cannot be shielded. They will tick for about 15k and the current will tick for about 10 to 12 at this point in its duration. So if you get hit by both at the same time and don't immediately get healed back up, you will die 1 second later when the current ticks again. However, the current can be shielded. So we will attempt to mitigate the damage of the current by shielding with impervious right when the lines go out, so that we only take damage from the line and not from the current. To do this, you'll probably need to hit impervious twice. All of the mirror lines get dispersed within a 2 to 3 second window. They don't go off at the same time. So you'll want to try to hit impervious right as the first set of mirror lines begin going out and hit it one more time as soon as your global cooldown allows you to, so that you ensure you get the shielding whenever your line does go out. If you do this, you should live with no problem. So with all this in mind, the only time our rotation changes is when we are not in range of the boss to cast abilities like Cloak or Trap. We shouldn't reapply Cloak early, and we will even let it expire if we are moving out for the mirror mechanic. We can reapply Trap a little earlier though if it's going to expire while we start moving out, I would say with 3 seconds or less left. So when you're moving in and out for mirrors, maintain a regular rotation, only letting Trap and Cloak occasionally fall off if you can't get in range of the boss. While you are out for mirrors, try to get used to moving along your line without moving it to make sure that you can still get within beam range of the boss. It's more important to not move your line though, so only do this if you are extremely comfortable with the mechanic. That would be a really silly way to lose a trifecta, and the damage increase isn't worth the loss there. The last element in dealing damage revolves around taking the current. Regardless of my timers, I like to try to reapply my dots and AoEs, especially ones like Trap, about 5 seconds before I'm supposed to take the current, so that they tick their entire duration while I'm holding the current, and that I can't really get close enough to reapply them always without risking dumping the current off to somebody somebody else. This also allows you to just flail and pragmatic through the current until it comes time to block the chain or swap it off, which will alleviate some pressure for your healers as well. We've talked a lot, but I think the best way to learn about this fight is to see it in action in a walkthrough. This walkthrough is going to focus specifically on Xoryn. The fights leading up to this point are so short that the explanations are good enough to show you how to do good damage, in my opinion. But Xoryn can feel a little overwhelming, and lining up the mechanics with whatever's going on in your rotation can be a little bit trickier. Remember, it's important to walk into Xoryn on a fresh knot, so when this one is fracturing in this room, this will be our opportunity to pre-buff. We'll make sure that we have at least 2 Crux, since we can build our third one when we cast Flail on Xoryn for Abyssal Ink, and then we'll make sure that we're keeping our stamina low. As we run into the room, we'll cast Cloak and Scholarship, and then pre-place our AoEs, that is Caltrops and Wall, from a bit of range. Then we'll apply Fulminating and Trap, then our ultimate, and then we should be able to flail one time and go into a beam for this first Chain Lightning. After that, we're just simply maintaining our rotation. Nothing needs to be reapplied, so we'll beam again. And at the end of this, we'll need to reapply Cloak, Wall, Caltrops, and Fulminating. Now right here, we're about to get another Chain Lightning. Now keep in mind that when you see the boss channeling, you have 3 seconds before the mechanic is going to go out before you need to be in some sort of mitigation. We need to reapply Trap, Fulminating, we need to flail one more time, and then we can go into beam. That's at least 4 GCDs, so there is a chance that we do get hit by the chain before going into pragmatic that guarantees our safety. For this reason, we'll go ahead and cast flail right before it goes off, followed by trap and fulminating while we are block casting chain lightning until we can go into pragmatic and back out and avoid taking damage unblocked. Then here we just maintain a regular rotation, and I'm going to take the current next. So normally here, this is about when I would want to start preparing my dots and AoEs. However, I would have to get in to cast Trap as the knot is about to fracture, so we're just going to go ahead and let that fall off. And it has 7 seconds left, so it's not going to be down for too terribly long, and it will be the only ability that is down. So we're going to take the current right after this chain that we have a barrier through, so we don't need to shield or block it. And then again, we just maintain our rotation. This first part of current isn't going to do much damage, it's this very back half of it. We're reapplying our AoEs, we're maintaining a regular rotation, and now here is the most dangerous part of the fight where we're going to take chain while holding current. As you can see, the add-on tells me that I've been holding it for 13 seconds, so my partner is going to need to take it, and we are going to be the last ones hit by chain lightning. Now, normally here, this is where I would suggest impervious and blocking. However, I played it extremely risky and my healers kept me alive without really doing any of that. I just block it, walk out, and am totally safe. Now, if you're watching this and in my groups, do not be greedy like this. Please just hit impervious and block. When you're going for the trifecta, it's the safest thing to do. I was going for a parse though, and I felt that it was safe to do that. So walking out of the current, we're now going into mirror mechanic with the few abilities that need to be reapplied. We're going to get close to the boss and try to get a trap off right before going into our mirror line. And trying to avoid moving this mirror line as much as possible, we do move it a little bit to the left, but we've identified a safe space right in this little intersection of lines that we're going to work towards, and we're going to build Crux as we walk towards it. Finally getting set and going into a beam, we need to get fulminating our ultimate, Caltrops, and wall back on the boss during this next chain lightning that's about to happen. In this situation, all of our dots and AoEs are down, we need to flail, and chain lightning is literally about to start going out. So what do we do to maximize damage in this situation? You'll already see that I'm starting to back up ever so slightly as I cast flail, and this is in an attempt to try to be one of the last people to get hit by chain. I don't have a shield and I'm casting flail, so I can't really block. That is, at least for 0.3 seconds of the cast, I can't block. In fact, what I do is I hit flail immediately into a block cancel with 2.9k stam, and you'll see I try to go into pragmatic, but am unable to because we do block it and are out of stamina. So besides running out of stamina, this is about as perfect as you can play this situation in terms of min-maxing damage. When we need to flail, try to block cancel the ability and back up so that you're one of the last people to get hit by chain lightning. In fact, we're going to back this up just a few frames here. Remember, it's this 3-second window that you can get hit by chain lightning, and we only need to cast 2 abilities, which is going to take 2 seconds. So if I can make it so that I'm one of the people to get hit in the last second, I'm going to safely be able to apply flail while blocking the chain and being able to go into pragmatic as soon as I get enough stamina to do so. Going into the next chain just before the mirror mechanic, we are able to do so in a pragmatic, super safe, super easy, and we're just maintaining a regular rotation. Fulminating needs to be reapplied, followed by Scholarship. A bit of extra moving that I don't suggest doing, but my thought process here is that I realize as my line spawning that I moved it a little bit because I was already going to the left, so I tried to reposition it back to where it originally was. The movement occurred in the front half of the phase, which is technically okay, but I would probably just avoid doing that in the future. As this goes off, we need to reapply Cloak, Wall, Scholarship, and Trap, and then we need to block Chain now. So we need to reapply Trap into 2 flails. We're going to block cast here and simply block this chain altogether before going into Flail and Pragmatic. Ultimate's ready, followed by the reapplication of Fulminating Rune on the back bar, and Wall and Caltrops into a Chain Lightning, which we can hit Cloak in Pragmatic. Rewinding this here one more time. We cast Cloak right as Chain's about to come out, and we are block casting Cloak, as you'll notice, right before going into Pragmatic. And this is something that I do a lot. When I'm not sure and when I'm reapplying dots and AoEs, when I think it's time to block Chain, I'll just start block casting my abilities until I can go into Pragmatic, avoiding hitting my light attack button altogether most of the time. And now this is the first instance of that scenario that we discussed earlier. Trap does need to be reapplied on Xoryn, but we don't have the ability to do so, so we're obviously just going to let it expire, and we'll reapply Trap as soon as we can comfortably get into Xoryn to be able to do so. Also a bit of a tricky line situation here. You'll notice that I don't have a lot of space in front or behind. So we find ourselves kind of in this little triangle of safety, and as long as these lines don't move, this should be plenty of room. Normally, you really have to trust your group members to be okay with a situation like this, but no amount of me moving forward or backwards is going to put me in a better situation. So we're just going to go into Pragmatic here and hope for the best. So now that the mirrors are gone, we have Chain Lightning coming out. Take a quick second and just think about what would you do in this situation. Would you go straight into your Pragmatic here as soon as it's time to block Chain Lightning, or would you block cast and reapply a few more dots and AoEs? I think we need to move a few frames here to know for sure, but in a little bit of pre-planning, we know that we at least have to reapply Trap, Caltrops, Wall, and Flail 2 times. By the time we do that, Fulminating Rune, which has 2 seconds left, is likely going to need to be reapplied as well. So we'll probably walk in, reapplying a couple of dots, and start block casting here right at 3 seconds, which is exactly what we do. Reapplying Fulminating, then Trap, get hit by Chain so we can Flail until Cloak expires, then we reapply Cloak and can go into a Beam. So no need to even Pragmatic through that. Our dots and AoEs wouldn't allow us to do so. Let's pause and look at our timers. Nothing really is going to run out in the next 4 seconds, and we almost have an ultimate ready with 3 Crux. So do you think that we're just going to block cast through this one, or will we Pragmatic through it? The safest thing to do is to just Pragmatic through this. However, I am going to block cast and hit an extra Flail here in the hopes of getting an ultimate off, which I'm able to do right at about 2.5 seconds, and then go straight into a Beam before we even get hit by the Chain Lightning. Dot priority, Scholarship, Fulminating, we get Cloak back up, we need to get Wall, Caltrops, and Trap back down, and then we have another Chain Lightning. Do you think that we block cast some dots and AoEs, or do we just Pragmatic through this one? And this is probably the easiest case of Pragmatic throughout the entire fight. No dots and AoEs need to be reapplied, we can simply just hit Beam. And you'll see that we have 0.2 seconds left of Beam, lined up perfectly with 0.2 seconds left of Chain. We didn't see it here, but if you're ever in a situation where Beam is running out as Chain is going out, then I cancel my Beam maybe right at about this point, right before it's about to go away, just so that I can be blocking, because it would be really unfortunate for Chain to hit me right as Pragmatic expires. So in this situation, if I hadn't already been hit by Chain, I probably would have just blocked and canceled my book. And from here on out, all of our dots and AoEs are down at about 10.8 mil on the boss. This execute burst phase is wrapped up in a tight little bow. Super easy. We'll just Flail and Beam until this boss is dead from here on out, even if Wall and Caltrops run out. And you'll see right here a little bit later that, in fact, they are about to run out, and we do get our ultimate at about 5 mil left on the boss, so I think that it's worth dropping there. Wall and Caltrops not worth reapplying, though, because by the time we do cast that ultimate, the boss will be at, like, 2 or 3 mil, which is maybe half a beam away from dead, so we'd only get 1, maybe 2 ticks of each of those AoEs if we were to reapply them there. Definitely not worth it. And that wraps up Xoryn. It really is that easy. Prioritize maintaining your rotation and then either blocking and going into pragmatic or hitting pragmatic during chain lightning, just depending on what's going on in your rotation. The only cheesy thing that you can do is back up to cast Flail as we did before, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. And maybe one of the coolest things about ESO endgame is that people are always finding slightly better ways to do each and every piece of content in the game. So while this is currently the best way that I've found to handle the trial, that doesn't by any means that it is the absolute best way. In fact, if you think that I missed anything, or if you think that you found a slightly better way to do something in any of these fights, please let me know. Otherwise, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below so that others have the chance to learn from them as well. I'm sure that you're not the only one who has that specific question. Somebody else certainly has it as well. Be sure to join the Discord to get access to the setups that I used in my top parses, and to see any updated setups that might come with future patches. I will be sure to keep those as updated as I possibly can. A huge shout out and thank you to all of my current YouTube and Patreon members. For my tier 2s and above, thank you so much to Joseph, Vic, Joshua, Larry, Arlberg, Carla, Robert, and a massive shout out and thank you to Clyde and Nick for those tier 5s. Seriously, thank you so much for all of your support, my friends. It's because of you that this content is made possible. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you want to support me and my content, be sure to like and subscribe to the video. Check me out and shoot me a follow on Twitch and Twitter, and support me on Patreon or by becoming a YouTube member as well. And with that, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for all of your love and support, guys. I appreciate each and every one of you, and I will see you in the next one.